So, what is the euro? Who has adopted it? What does it look like? Is it a tool to create the United States of Europe? How do you spell it? All of these questions won't be answered, and if you thought they were, then please read the homework task. But here are the answers for those who were curious. So firstly, I don't agree with this notion. The best entrepreneurs in life took massive risks. It is part of running a business, and uncertainty alone isn't a good reason to not follow the euro. However, I am not a big fan of the euro, and for reasons that can be displayed by real life events. But before we go into that, let's talk about some of the economic theory, because economics is fun. So firstly, you lose control over your monetary policy. This means you can't print money, change interest rates, or limit the money supply. A country must keep annual budget deficits to less than 3% of GDP, and debt to GDP ratios must be less than 60%. Some countries can't stop spending this easily. This can cause issues. A government couldn't boost spending to stimulate the economy during a tough time, or cut taxes, as this could actually affect debt to GDP or deficit to GDP, as they could go over the limits. When a country adopts it, they lose some cultural identity. What I mean by this is, every country will have a currency, it is probably part of their culture, we can identify a country by their currency. I mean, yes, technically the Irish used to have a pound, but it was called the Irish pound, and it had a cool animal on it. So, you know, a different thing. So, when we adopt the euro, the playing field becomes even within European countries who have the euro. This might seem at first really great, as it means everyone, you know, has an even playing field with the exchange rates. However, we all know it's going to be the countries like Germany, who have the better economies of scale, are going to basically be able to wipe the floor with other countries in terms of producing goods and services that are either cheaper or higher quality. You can't abuse exchange rates to boost exports or make imports cheaper. I know our boys over in the United Kingdom love a good strong pound. And no, not one you get in the pub when you insult UKIP. The currency pound. And it increases our purchasing power abroad. Europe is a very diverse place. Many diverse economies, and they're all trying to use one monetary policy. Not all countries will get what they need from it. Stronger economies will need to cooperate with weaker ones who tend to have higher inflation. And one central bank can't set an interest rate that is appropriate for each country. Inflation is the most important macroeconomic objective, and joining the euro limits how a nation can control it, because they can't basically do what they want with the monetary supply. Yes, the ECB sets targets and interest rates for all nations, but each country will have a different reaction to these policies. So here are some of the reasons economic theory could disagree with the euro, but as we all know, economic theory can suggest anything, like communism working or Brexit making the UK great again. So let's look at some data. Here are two Eurozone economies, Ireland and France. The Irish are basically on drugs, and the French are like me in a museum, dull and motionless. Now, you can't look at that growth and tell me these two economies want the same interest rate. Clearly France needs something to stimulate growth, and Ireland needs to learn how to stop, as 26% is insane. Now let's look at the inflation rate of a few Eurozone countries, as obviously manipulating the monetary policy is probably more done to impact inflation than growth. So, France and Ireland are somewhat close to each other compared to how different and wild their growth rates were. But Ireland has encountered deflation a couple of times, but recovered fairly quickly. But before you claim victory, Europhiles, there are 19 countries who have adopted the euro, and we have looked at 2 of them. So I found 2 Eurozone countries with very different inflation rates. Lithuania and Italy. Now, in their defense, both countries are nowhere near as mad as some developing ones, but if they want to have the same currency and follow the same monetary policy, they should be close together at least. I mean, Lithuania is above the target and the range, while Italy is below the target, but is borderline of the range. As competent economists, you can't say with a straight face that this is in the interest of these two nations to have the same interest rates. I'll see myself out. The Eurozone was established in 1999 and has 19 members. Monetary policies for these 19 states is handled by the Central European Bank in Frankfurt. One main goal is to maintain sensible inflation for member countries, so this would be amazing if only a few strong economies who are similar were in it, like Germany, France and Italy. But sadly, this is not what is happening. Luckily, there are requirements for a country to join the euro, so only economies who have proven to get somewhat close to each other can actually get in. However, this would seem I've defeated my own argument. Well, my friend, you are wrong. Our boys over at Greece were able to enter the Eurozone without meeting their criteria by understating their deficits. But we'll come back later to them. So now, Euro people, if it is so great, why haven't all member states adopted it? 9 members still use their own currency. We have IKEA, we have White Europe, we have Suicide Goat, we have Earth's least magic kingdom, and the rest. Firstly, the UK is going to leave the EU, okay? And technically, in 2015, they had a deficit which was 4.1% of their GDP, so they couldn't actually join if they wanted to. So let's look at Poland, who uses the zloty, and in 2015 had a deficit of 2.9% of GDP. And before you say that is slightly under 3%, the year before they had a surplus of 5.6% of GDP. But regardless, they qualify in that category. However, many years before they kinda didn't, so oops. So let's look at our good friends at Sweden. They smash this criteria every year, ranging from surpluses of up to 2.2% of GDP down to deficits of 1.5% of GDP. So even if Poland didn't qualify each year, our boys at Sweden have. Now I need to destroy my argument, as 7 nations failed to meet all requirements, but upon meeting the convergence criteria, they have to join, due to the Maastricht Treaty. So this leaves us with just the UK, who we won't use as they're leaving the EU, but have smashed the criteria every year before the financial crash. So have I failed? Is the euro a saintly currency and should be used by all? Well, luckily there is one nation who I can rely on, and that is Denmark, who in 2000 had a referendum on introducing the euro. Only 46.8% were in favour, while 53.2% had a brain. Firstly, why aren't they using the euro? They signed the Maastricht Treaty and meet all 5 criteria. Well, my friend, the treaty allowed Denmark to opt out, in which they did, but gives them the freedom to join if they wanted to. So why did they reject the euro? Firstly, national identity and pride of the Danish krone. Secondly, it moves the monetary policy out of the country, and as they have a pretty stable economy, unlike other EU countries, why would they change things? Now, you Euro people may scream stuff at me like, but exchange rates can make trade with other EU countries harder. You would be somewhat correct, but you see the krone is pegged to the euro as part of the ERM2. Basically, Denmark has the best of both worlds. They have the autonomy, but they do have a link to euro, which removes any exchange rate uncertainty when doing trade within the Eurozone. And since the krone has been part of the ERM2 since 1999, they can unpeg their currency if they had to. Lastly, time to go back to Greece. Now, I wouldn't bother explaining their whole crisis, as you should know from reading the news, but basically they went from a bull economy to a bear one. Basically, before Greece joined the euro, they had high interest rates and bank loaners would limit how much they loaned to Greece. However, when they adopted the euro, interest rates were low, and as they had the euro, this new currency backed by the likes of Germany, loaners felt more confident loaning more to Greece. However, Greece couldn't afford to pay that back, and after loads of spending came massive growth via a positive multiplier effect occurred. However, when the crash happened, they couldn't keep spending that much, and a massive negative multiplier effect occurred, because they couldn't pay back their loans, so they weren't being loaned as much, and they had all this debt. So the euro was a big cause of the Greek crisis. Now before you scream, but Max, Greece manipulated the values to get in. They never met the requirements. True, you speak truth there. But surely the EU could have verified these values with a little investigating. So Greece had a massive unemployment back in 2015-2014, so a nice place like Greece would want to devalue their currency by decreasing interest rates or printing more money to help boost their exports and boost their tourism, and to boost investment as it is cheaper to invest. But guess what? Greece couldn't do that as they had the euro. As they couldn't attempt to fix some of the economic issues, the country became unstable. The EU threw over 100 billion euros at them and they still struggled. So the euro didn't start the downturn, but prevented Greece from taking certain actions to try and correct some of the issues of their economy and allowed Greece to go mad with spending. Also, tax evasion and corrupt politicians didn't help either. Things are, however, getting better because Greece are now borrowing more, but they could have rebounded quicker if they had more autonomy. So sadly, we've run out of time, but I hope you understand why I'm not the biggest fan of the euro. So instead of adopting the euro, let's all just adopt Bitcoin as our official currency.